All right, well, I'm going to get started. Hello. My name is Glen Braun, and I want to first congratulate the team for the launch of the testnet. That was an awesome event yesterday to be here and to see everyone applauding for that launch and know the work that went into it, behind it, was tremendous. And to see that yesterday was really, I was proud to be able to watch that. It was really great. And also the fact that we're launching R-Chain Europe and the future that that'll bring as well is really exciting for me too. So thank you to those that are all been part of that effort. It's really special for someone who hopes to build on top of this platform to see those pieces coming together. So what I'm going to talk to you about is something that's come to me over the last, I don't know, quite a few years, different pieces. Just from looking at my career and while working, sort of observing basically the organizations that I've worked in, just sort of meta information, just observing how things get done, the process of work, and those types of things. And so there's one example. There's many examples that have driven how I think about this, but one of them was when I was working at Microsoft inside of Bing Maps. And my job was to lead the development team that published the map data, all the rivers and roads and lakes and all the rest of that. So we had GIS software that we built in-house. It processed this data that we purchased from a vendor, and that made the map, at least the base map. And especially when we went to the web and it became more visible, I was the one that got a lot of the emails saying that the data is wrong here, wrong there, and so on and so forth. And while it wasn't completely uncommon that we were the problem for that, we would, of course, fix the issue that we caused, but a lot of times the data itself was just wrong. And this was simply purchased from a vendor that had a traditional hierarchical company that needed to be only incentivized to be better than the second best or their competition. And with all of the capital expense that goes into gathering the world's data of roads and all the rest of that, it's pretty hard to be a competitor. And so the quality was just not that great. And so while I was at Bing Maps, Microsoft hired Steve Coast, who started OpenStreetMap. And that was my first look into what a widely distributed workforce can produce. And the quality, would guess you're aware, like in Germany, the quality of the OpenStreetMap data is pretty amazing. And for instance, there were events where there was a disaster in Haiti in particular, and instantly a bunch of people were able to go online and collect data and build maps that helped the relief efforts there. So, which an individual company that is, well, a more traditional company just wouldn't be able to answer those needs. So I thought about how having that local knowledge, or that being the right person that knows how to provide a solution at the right time, was so valuable. And at the time we were thinking through, well, there was a problem though, in that the tasks that were kind of interesting, right, that were fun to do or triggered, in a response of happiness or pride that you've contributed to the community, those tasks got done. But some of the less interesting work, like creating a consistent schema across the entire data set, making sure that every road was routable so that your routing engine would properly direct you through the data. These types of things are less visible and also tended to just serve business interests that didn't really fit with your own motivation to do this for free. And so while it made amazing maps, we also could see some of the problems there where people weren't incentivized with basically getting paid to do the less interesting work. So there was some analysis, and I wasn't involved in that directly, but I think they came up with about $300 a year is what someone would actually be able to make if there was a viable business using this approach. And $300 a year is just, that's not a salary. And so it wasn't economically feasible. So I thought, okay, well, I didn't have a solution, but still in the back of my mind, I did think, okay, is there a way that you could build a viable economic way to compensate people for this type of work? And it was also driven a little bit by a meeting that I was in where they were looking at purchasing another company that had done a lot of this crowdsourcing type of data. And one of the founders of that company very, very strongly said, don't ever pay them. And I thought, okay, well, I think that if this sale goes through, you're probably going to make, I don't know how many millions of dollars yourself. And yet you're really strongly saying that you should never, ever pay these folks that have really built what you're selling. And that didn't really settle all that well with me. It seemed that there should be some sort of a solution. So that's just one story of what's kind of led me here. And this Our Hours project is sort of where that's led to right now. It started out with the idea of just creating a license that said, yes, you can use this, but you have to pay us, but we'll be honest about what went into it. And it turned into now what I'm calling Our Hours. And this is a business model that I hope will create a form of universal self-employment. So we'll see how that plays out here as I describe it for you. So another concept in my thoughts of what's led here is this idea of a software-defined organization. We certainly use software in our organizations today with software-based accounting systems and all the rest, but I had an image of what if some programmers got together and said, well, what if we code the organization from day one, right? Like two people get together and they say, well, we're going to have some revenue and let's just be simple about it. We'll split that revenue 50-50. Like that's a pretty easy function to write. Revenue comes in, you divide it by 2, half of it goes here, half of it goes there. So that's the general concept. If you add a third partner, you might divide by 3, right? Obviously, for a larger organization, that code is going to get a lot more complex. But the central concept is that you're not using apps, you're not using applications that have essentially carried the same metaphors that we used in a paper-based system, but you're really coming together and agreeing on the structure and the operations of this organization by using code. And I use the term software-defined organization rather than DAO, because I don't see this as autonomous. I think that our businesses change, they could change almost every minute. And so we would change the code as frequently as we make our decisions about how a business would run. So especially when I got into our chain and started looking at Rolang, I felt that Rolang would be a good business process definition language. And there are some business process languages. There's BPML and other business processes. But to my knowledge, these haven't caught on all that much. And I think part of it's because we don't have a culture in our organizations that we have to code them. We do want to automate them to reduce labor costs and these types of things and have efficiencies, but not necessarily that we are all involved in a software design process where we really get to change the organization through the software. And so when I look at Rolang, I see its basic fundamental aspect of being about sending and receiving. And I think that that's a general way that we can look at what our rights are inside of an organization. And so that is the central concept that we would code our organizations. And so let's see if I've covered some of these. Yeah, send and receive. I would love to do a research project of, can I get a group of people in a room to get something done where the only way they can communicate is to create channels and to send messages and receive messages over those channels. What would happen? Would people think, oh no, we need a new channel, we need a new type of message, and so on and so forth? And I think it would. And I think it's natural to all of us, that what we can say, who we can say it to, what they can do with that message, and so on and so forth, it maps to our social processes. And so that's yet to be proven, but that's kind of an assumption that we would build out these types of libraries and define these business processes. So I like to think, if you change the code, you change the firm, is kind of the idea. So in a software design process, you need some fundamental truths that you are going to design by. And so there's two economic foundations that this R-hours model is based on. One of them is called the labor theory of property, and the other is from a book called Radical Markets. So the labor theory of property was written by Dr. David Ellerman. He's an economist, computer scientist, philosopher, mathematician. He wrote a book called The Democratic Worker-Owned Firm, and this was about 1990, so it's been around a little while. And there wasn't anything like smart contracts in the day. So I've taken that, the ideas in that book and mapped them into this space of a smart contract-driven model. So the labor theory of property, it starts with human responsibility, that we're responsible for our actions. And of course, usually when we say you have to be responsible, we mean that if you've done something wrong, you have to own up to it. But Ellerman states, well, that's true. We have to take the liability of our actions. But in an economic model, you can have negative value or positive value. And so we can also be responsible for the positive value of our actions. And so this is the essence of the labor theory of property. And so conceptually, we should think of this as, if we do something, if we take some action, if we use our will to do something, that the output of our will, of our actions, is initially ours, and it's not something that can be separated. And the property aspect of this says that we actually own this thing. And he assumes a market-based economy where now that you have this property, you're able to trade it for other people's property. So I've taken that and said, okay, well, when people make a contribution, when people have an effort and take an effort in a project, that we immediately wrap that into a financial instrument in using a smart contract. This type of thinking makes you understand that really that's what a firm or a company is all of those contracts and agreements. Now, in an employment agreement, there's a standing order for your property, if you will, right? They've said, I'm going to buy all of the output of your work at this price until we stop doing that, right? So it maps to our current employment model, but does make explicit that the ownership starts with the individual who performed the action. The second economic fundamental that this model is based on is from a book called Radical Markets. And this was written by two people. One of them, I believe, is a policy lawyer, and the other is an economist and a researcher at Microsoft Research. And this book has two elements that I'd like to share. One of them I actually do put into the R-hours model. The other one is just interesting, and I'll share that one first, and that's the bottom one of quadratic voting. This concept is quite interesting. It tries to fix our one person, one vote issues. And the way it works is if there were an issue that all of us were going to vote on right now, what I would do is I would hand some little token, a little something to you. You would get one of them. And then I'd put the issue up, and let's say you can vote yes or no. Now you would have the choice to use that token to vote yes or vote no, or to abstain and to hold that token. And so the next issue would come up, and same thing, I would hand you one of these tokens. And you could use that token to vote yes or no, or again, you could abstain. So now you have 2 of them. And so on and so on and so on. You could wind up with quite a number of these tokens. And you would choose to do this because you might not care that much about that particular issue. Or you might think that the majority is going to pass the issue the way you like it, and you'd rather keep your tokens for something that you really are passionate or think will go some other way than you would like. So let's say that happens. Let's say that issue comes up that you're really strongly either in favor of or against, and now you've got a bunch of tokens. The quadratic part of this is that you actually get the square root of your total tokens that you spend in votes. What that means is if you want to actually vote 4 times in favor of the proposal, let's say, you have to provide 16 tokens. And so that quadratic aspect, he has economic principles that argue that this makes sense from an economic standpoint. But it allows someone who's in the minority but feels strongly to still have a say. So I think that's pretty interesting when we look at governance practices down the road. So I just want to raise that point. I think that's worth looking into. Another aspect in this book is called a self-assessed tax. And the way what this addresses is our society's ability to use resources efficiently. And today, usually our governments do the assessment of property, and that's what we're taxed on. With the self-assessed tax, all of our property is always for sale. So if you want to keep your laptop, you have to set a price that's really high that no one's going to buy your laptop from you. If they provided that price, you got to sell it. And so what happens is that you get taxed on that self-assessed value. So if you don't want to pay much tax, you can set it really low, but you also risk that someone can come in and buy that from you. And of course, they wouldn't buy it from you if they didn't feel that they could make more with that resource, make more economic value using that resource than you can. And so the concept is that the prices would reach a true value of the resource. So I use that as well in this model. So let's dive into those are the theoretical underpinnings. Let's take a look at how the model actually works. So again, we have a labor theory of property, so let's start with the actual labor, and we call those contributions. And when you do something, it's a contribution to a project. I like to think of like a GitHub project, but really this is any organization of people that you're collaborating with to produce something of value. Right? You do something for that project or that organization. And so the organization has the choice as whether they're going to accept your contribution. And once they do, they accept it, and they also accept, when they accept it, they accept that they will pay you out of the revenue of that organization. They're producing something of value. They're going to take that to the market. It's going to sell. Customers are going to purchase it. And by taking your contribution, they're making a promise to you that out of that revenue, they will also compensate you. So inside a contribution are claims and terms. We'll start with terms, actually. Those are kind of easier. Let's say you fix a bug. It took you 10 hours. You want $50 an hour. So you say, I want $500. Pretty simple. That's a term. And this comes from the fact that everything's always for sale. So you've created that property, you've put a price on it, and that's the price. The claim is what you did as an individual. What was it you did? And I use the word claim because in the identity space, there's this notion of verifiable claims. And that's where this comes from. It's kind of hinting at a future reputation system. Because what's happening is if you've done some work, you've fixed this bug, maybe you want to claim that you did some Scala programming, or you you did debugging with a certain debugger, or you think of a whole host of activities that you yourself did to make that bug fix. So that's what these claims are, and by having them accepted inside of a project, there's an implicit verification or acceptance of that you really did that. The project could lie, and you could create fake projects and these types of things. It can be gamed, but the idea is there's this trust network that builds up. So that's where the claims come from. And so you see both a claim, that's a human activity, and you see the price, that's the terms for this property that's always for sale. So let's just take a quick example, super simple. I intentionally am choosing here an example of like painting a house, which is a non-technical type of project. Remember I was saying that I think we can write business processes inside of Rolang, so we could program a house painting business in Rolang. It wouldn't paint the house, but it could do all the different aspects of actually running a house painting service. So here the claims are really simple. The person who did the painting just says, I went out and I bid the job, I created an estimate, and then I painted the house. It's a human activity. And then the terms are that I want so much money. And here the revenue function is super easy. I painted it, it's done, you pay me, we're done, right? So the next project is a little bit different. Let's imagine we have a scheduling application. And if you think about scheduling and you were writing it in Rolang or on a blockchain and you were thinking of game theory and stuff, you could think of some issues where you could game your competitors by, I don't know, scheduling them a whole bunch of appointments that aren't real, all sorts of different mechanisms. So I think this space with our chain and Rolang and this blockchain space applies to write a scheduling service. So again, the types of claims you would have here is designing the UI, coding it, debugging, marketing, all that sort of stuff. And your terms might add up, all those contributions, to a large amount. And so all those people who did all that work come together and decide, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to charge. We're going to meter this service and charge, I think I have it at 0.2 of a penny per scheduling event, right? This is like the AWS model. They super low prices, but the volumes for these transactions is really high, and they do pretty well at it. So the same thing here. One thing is that as all these pennies add up, they have to add up to, what is it, 2 million. And once it reaches the 2 million, and there's no more contributions to compensate, we make it public, right? That's the commitment in this compensated open source, is that now no one pays after that, right? In our normal model where we own a company, we keep wanting that fee forever and ever and ever, right? Which I think gets us into some trouble where you have to keep defending your ability to collect that fee. And open source, where it's completely free with no cost whatsoever, really fought against that, right? Said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. So this is sort of in between. It says, no, we want to be compensated for what we did, but we make this promise to you that once we've been compensated, it's out there and it's free. So when we look back at the house painting business, they certainly could use scheduling as part of their operations, right? They have to go out to the house, take a look at it, maybe schedule another meeting, so on and so forth. So we wouldn't normally think of scheduling as a tool for house painting, but if you really think of a software-defined business, and you think of adding up all these components that now makes this business, you can certainly think of scheduling as one of those components. And that house painting business is going to pay that 0.2 of a cent out of their revenue. That's how, that's where it's going to come from. And so what I'm doing is superimposing or projecting the normal software development type model of componentization and reuse and such onto the business itself. And so here we just see that we can consume that scheduling service and pay out of revenue as well. So what this means is that when you do add those components, you could imagine hundreds of them, right, to make up the business. When revenue comes in, that revenue fans out and goes to all of those different components that were involved in your business. And again, once those get fully compensated, they're no longer meant for you don't have to pay for them anymore. So that's the general idea. Okay. As we imagine starting a business and building out the service, whatever your business does, you don't right away have revenue. You may not even get the revenue that you're asking for. That $2 million to create the scheduling service might not make hardly anything or at all. So there's going to be some time where you're not being compensated. And so we have to consider that contribution alone to the organization. And so we give an interest rate. And these interest rates can be pretty high. If you have a very risky project that might not earn anything, I see no reason why you couldn't set up interest rates that would be comparable to what a venture capitalist would want of a return from their investment. So on the other hand, if you're it's my hope that as we start to define business processes in code, that we'll understand what modules work, right? Oh, that's a great scheduling service, or oh, that's a great interview process, or oh, that's a great whatever. And so that'll reduce risk when the next business consumes those same pieces. And so as we reduce the risk, hopefully we can reduce the financing cost to start new ventures. But nonetheless, the key point is that part of the terms not only includes the price today, if you did $1,000 of work, but an interest rate that will accrue interest until you've been fully compensated. So if you remember that these contracts against revenue are financial instruments, they're properties that you can own, then because you own them, you can sell them. And so, of course, one way that you're going to get the full value of them is to let revenue come in from customers, and so you continue to hold them. But you might want money today. And so there'll be people who are open to purchasing that from you at a lower price than the total that's going to come in from revenue, and then they'll take the remainder, the excess. So this creates a sort of futures market that I think would then inform the price that you should pay to other contributors, as well as give an indication as to the trust in that project. If a lot of people are buying and the prices are high for those contributions, that means there's a lot of confidence that there really will be the revenue coming in that you hope for. And so this forms a kind of investment vehicle. And I think especially in terms of, let's say, Archain co-op or, in the co-op case, we have a treasury and we want to invest in various projects, but the projects themselves might have, well, in this model they have to have revenue, but they might have a whole bunch of other investors who would be interested that aren't wanting to, like let's say a house painting service, right, where you want to actually make this a franchise that maybe there are thousands of house painters that use this model. Well, house painting and rock or rev doesn't really fit, right? They're not buying the platform. So this model provides a way to have investment from people who are interested in that service, such as house painting, but not in the underlying Archain platform, right? So in other words, you can combine interests because people will come at the investment from different avenues. Another aspect to look at is, again, we're projecting the software development process onto business organizations. And one thing we can do with a software project is we can fork the code. What this means is that if you work for an organization and you don't like the direction that it's going, you could find a group of people who want to take the organization in a new direction and simply fork the whole organization. The only thing is in the compensated open source model is that you have to agree to share your revenue to pay for the trunk from which you forked. But this type of openness in terms of building a business this way actually forms a type of competition plus cooperation. Because people have stated what they want to receive for their contributions, they really shouldn't care if it comes from one fork or from another. Now, they will care about the rate it comes and these types of things, and you need a governance a process where those who have a stake can help make these forking agreements. But still, it opens up new possibilities for structuring businesses. One thing, for instance, today it's really common that if we want like one bug fix or just one new feature, we have to usually buy the whole next version, which may bring about a whole new term of service, term of use, and a whole bunch of stuff that we may not want. Well, with this model, someone could fork that, do some additional contributions, not that many, and you could purchase just those, and should be totally in line with the model. So, in terms of openness, as soon as you start saying open, but it's only open after it's been paid for, you start to ask, well, is that really open? And I agree to that argument. If it's not free to start, as in free beer, is it really open? I can understand that argument. But I also think that this model retains a good portion of the reasons for openness. It retains a portion of to be faithful to that cause. One is that it does become public once it's compensated. And I would argue a lot of our open source code today, it got there because someone paid the people to write it. I would say that's true for our chain. Once we had funding and we paid a company that was willing to hire people and work on it, the amount of the check-ins went way up, right? Not that there weren't open source people interested, but I really think it was that funding that brought us here today. And so that's really that is an implication that says, well, it wouldn't have existed had it not been compensated. And so in my model, I'm saying that the compensation is going to come from the people who use it or who want to purchase those as the financial instruments. Another aspect of openness is that we're being transparent. We're being transparent about what the contributions are because we're wrapping them in smart contracts that would be on a blockchain. We're being open about how much of the project has been compensated. We're being open about, this is our price, and once it's met, it's now available, without charge. And then again, the forking is, I don't know how many businesses say, yeah, sure, take my brand and go off and build your own thing and go for it. We don't control that, and that's fine. As long as you compensate what you forked from, you're fine to do that. So I think that does argue towards openness. Additionally, of course, you need to govern yourselves. If you're a large group, you have to figure out how you're going to make decisions. And in the hours model, I don't define that. I simply say there will be governance. And in this space, in the blockchain space, there's tons of innovation going on in that space. And so I'm just anticipating that those things will come and that these hours projects can use them. Many projects will start with one person, a benevolent dictatorship. And I think that's absolutely fine. And they'll grow and use whatever types of governance works for them. So one thing that comes up too is the people who can participate in the governance of these organizations are the people who have outstanding uncompensated contributions. If you look at the contributions to a GitHub project, right? I mean, someone comes in the early days, they do some work, they may not work anymore on it, they stop, more people come in, so on and so forth, right? It varies over time. And if you can imagine revenue coming into an organization and paying those people for all their contributions, just gradually sharing, sort of gradually reaching each contributor's full compensation, they eventually get fully paid. And so their ownership is now, it's gone. They don't have any stake anymore. There's no more revenue that's going to come to them. And so the ownership moves through time and through all these different contributors. So to me, that was reminiscent of the mobile calculus. And so I have this term of mobile ownership. And I think we even have a potential where we could think that this continues forever. That as a customer, you purchase a piece of this organization, which you then have a stake in, and you could retain that ownership so that future purchasers are buying from you. And eventually, of course, without any more contributions, that it's likely that product becomes, stale and not that useful in the marketplace. But still, you could be a purchaser today, have a stake, and say, well, let's do these things, and so on and so forth, participate in the governance. So I think it opens up some interesting possible models there of ownership. I think also that this model creates a universal self-employment. We no longer divide ourselves as owners and employees. We are all kind of both. Well, not kind of, we really are. I mean, we hold a contract against revenue, which gives us a right to share in that revenue. And if you imagine many thousands and hundreds of thousands of these projects that you could contribute to in the same way you can with open source, you could imagine having an income portfolio where you would contribute to one project that has a very reliable stream of revenue. You contribute, they pay you like we would with a normal employment contract. Or you might choose to go work for another project that has much more risk, but you're interested. It may grow your skills, or who knows why you would go there. But if that project winds up being successful, that interest that you're earning could be a good return inside your portfolio. So you can imagine each of us having, tens, hundreds, so on of these projects that we've either contributed to directly, that's why we hold one of these financial instruments, or our knowledge of all these different projects that we've looked at informs our investment choices. So we can take our earnings and go back and purchase these instruments and have a revenue stream from those. So I see this as an alternative to tokenization. The terms can be expressed in any token. You can express them in a fiat currency, or as another way, inside of our chain, we can express them in rock. But as far as the actual project goes, I think this is an alternative to tokenization. And I think that makes a lot of sense for things that are just too small to tokenize. And I think it also makes sense for things that are just too big to tokenize. That we don't really want just one owner, one set of governance for that. And I think the mobile ownership might be an avenue for things that are too big to be run by one organization. I also think this makes sense in a down market because the investments are like loans, and they get paid back because there's revenue. And so the business model isn't one to say, hey, do we think that the speculation market is going to raise the price of this thing? In other words, you're trying to satisfy those who are betting on the project, but instead directly related to revenue. So I would love to find to use this model on businesses where the business itself is really well known, like painting houses or something, where the risk of not having revenue is pretty low, but the only thing we're adding is this model, and to see how this works, and to use that as a way to build out these business business processes coded in Rolang and such. But again, focusing on producing something that customers really want, they're going to pay for, and so there is this revenue stream for this model to work, and so you'll pay back those loans. There's another, in terms of things that are too big to be owned. Of course, identity is a big topic in this R-chain and blockchain space. And so this is actually a subject that's a little bit outside and forward, getting ahead of even of this business model, but it's something that I do want to share with you is a model for identity that is, I think, different than a lot of what I've been seeing. Our current idea of identity is that we're going to create some account in some other business, right? And that we need this almost as a key to open the door so we can walk inside their business and shop or do whatever it is that they have there. And I don't quite see it that way. I think we should think of an identity not as a key to get into somebody else's property, but to use a metaphor of our body. That we would never think of, even if it's in this identity space, we're focused on, like, let's have the smallest amount, like the smallest key possible, the smallest amount of data we'll share with them. But I think that's kind of a false viewpoint. Because even if we went inside someone's house or in their business, we still don't want them to, like, lop off just the end of our finger, right? That doesn't work. I wouldn't do that. And if you really think, I think that we've taken our physical space metaphors that have evolved over so many years, and we've used those same metaphors in our code that we've written. And I think we're at a point that's really pretty dangerous about that. In the 1950s, there was this better living through chemistry, and it's true. They were building all sorts of new materials, right? This podium has paints that came out of all that chemistry work, right? Tremendous growth in the number of new materials and chemistry. It's changing the environment we were living in. But at the same time, we realized that these chemicals are poisoning us and causing cancer and all the rest. And it was it was controversial to stand up to that. You were standing up against progress. And I think we're at the same point with code, where the data and the surveillance that we're doing on each other is like that type of pollution. And so if you think about it, if you were to walk into a shop 200 years ago, and when you walked into the shop, well, let's say 100 years ago, 50 years ago even, if you walked into that shop and they've hired perhaps a dozen people who will instantly, they have great face recognition. They can see you, and on the wall they've got all these pictures of people who've previously shopped there. And they look up and they find, oh, okay, that's you. And on the back they've got this data, and they're constantly following you. They're just an inch from you as you walk around the store, right? And more people come, like a dozen people around you all the time. Everything you touch is written down. Everything you look at, just written down in the minutest of detail. We would just freak out. We'd be like, what are you people doing? Get away from me, right? And we'd scream and run out of the store. And we'd tell our friends, like, don't ever shop there, right? Well, the thing is that because we've used that metaphor of the walls of the physical shop, and the merchandise got replaced with a server that has the catalog of the merchandise, right? that we just felt that that same metaphor is, well, you're still just walking in the door, and so, like, it's okay to, to watch you. And what I'm saying is that we walk into those digital doors thinking the same level of power on the other side, that it's a human scale of power. And so if there were one clerk there, well, yeah, they might remember you from some time before or whatever, but they have the same capabilities roughly that you do. You're equal levels of power. But that's not true when it's a digital space, right? Yeah, I mean, we know we could have servers running 24/7, constantly crunching all of that data, and so there's a real imbalance of power. There's so many cases of this. I mean, there was this really interesting project at MIT where the person wrote, a command line psychiatrist, right? A therapist. And so you would log into this application. It would say, "How are you?" or "What's on your mind?" And you'd say, "Oh, I got in an accident with my car." Right? And so the code just simply took out the small words like "and," the little words, and it would notice the nouns like car. It would notice that you said "I," and so it'd come back with something like, "Well, tell me more about your car," right? And so it was this kind of a funny joke, if you will, against the therapy. But what happened is that the person who programmed this did it for fun, but kept a log of all the entries, and all the people in their office that played with this program shared deep, probably true. And they could have been lying, but probably true things about their lives, because they used that metaphor of like, well, certainly my therapist is going to take notes, but they're not going to share it with anyone. That's part of, we've evolved that level of integrity and understanding and all those social cues about that person's responsibility to us. And what he noticed is that we just instantly said, oh, it must be just like a human. And actually, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of this project, but that same project is now on the Alexa device, right? And what an irony, right? You can now do this and say, I'm sorry about my car accident. It'll come back and say, tell me about your car. And so when this comes to identity, this idea that we carry over those metaphors is really troubling to me, and so that's why I'd like us to think of the metaphor of the body. And there's another issue too, where when we think that we're increasing our privacy by limiting the data more and more and more and more, we also have another effect, which is that we lose the ability for software to actually run on tons of our data. So if you think of like how we've evolved in our social processes of like we go to the doctor and I got clothes on right now, right? We're all glad of that. But when I go to the doctor, right, like we break those rules. We break those taboos. And if you think of your data as your body, you could have, petabytes, many per second, right? If I had records of every heartbeat, every place I've looked, video of every place I've looked, audio of everything I've heard, a GPS trace of everywhere I've been, right? Every enzyme, all sorts of sensors inside of our body. It's spooky, but if we think of it as our body and we really trusted a system that it's as safe as we are and how we've evolved as able to live with each other, you're all sitting kind of close to each other, but not that close, right? So we have this sense that we've evolved, and I think we need to use that in identity. And the question I have is like, okay, well, what business model works for that? Like when you think of if you could have that data owned by someone, and not only for you, but for all of us, right? The potential value of that is so high, and the incentive to just dip into that cookie jar just a little bit, right? I don't know that there's a business model that's going to work there, and I do believe that that code and those processes should be at least open and transparent. And so in this space, there's a lot of these, not just identity, but similar types of applications where I think are too big to be owned by an identity and too big to be owned by an influence of people who hold those tokens, that want the token price to go up, and so want to influence the organization that manages the utility of that token to dive in and break some of these rules that we probably need to be pretty firm about. So I think also because this is an alternative to tokenization, I think we may have an answer for that. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to kind of give an indication of where we are at. There is a we. It's not just me, but it is mostly me. There's two people from our co-op who've been contributors in this. One is Jake Gilberg, and the other is Joshi Orndorff. And they certainly have been acting as collaborators and contributors, as well as Jake's R-Chain collaborative learning project is using this R-Hours model. And the idea there is we'll build up some training material, we'll license it in this way, so if someone wants to give a paid training using that material, there'd probably be a per seat charge, and that would come in and compensate the effort to create the training material. This is a standard model. AWS did this, many people do. Additionally, if we don't want people to have to pay for that training, because we don't want to put barriers for people to learn how to program in Rolang right now, there's no reason that something like the Bounty program or other sources of funding couldn't buy those contributions today and fund that effort. The co-op is not set up to receive that revenue, right? They're not used to getting money back like that. And maybe they would choose not to. They would just say, no, we don't want to set up that revenue path back. But we could see other companies where they do want that revenue to come back. They would think, okay, well, in some time, people will be willing to pay for Rolang training or these R-Chain training, and so they want that money back for the investment that they make today. So that's one thing that I think we could move forward. Another is we could create any number of projects, and so this list could be really, really long. But there are a few. One, I've put together a proposal to do documentation. I've worked in that space in the past, and so the idea would be to get a couple of technical writers that are, that's what they do, editors, and maybe some programmer writers, and build out a reference for Rolang, build out developer documentation and operator documentation, and do it, like in a professional way. I think that would work for this model. I did put together the thought that maybe you could somehow people would pay for documentation, all the rest. I don't know if that's feasible, but so there wouldn't be a revenue back. Though I do think when we think ahead to people building Rolang libraries and wanting to document those, that if we do have a common documentation system that fits into our tool sets, that those people who build those libraries, if they use that same documentation system, then it would just naturally fit within the tool sets that we build. So maybe the tool set revenue or the class library revenue or something like that, there might be some possibility for revenue of documentation. And then additionally, the co-op has a whole bunch of processes. And if we think that Rolang is a good business process language, we could define co-op processes in Rolang. So for instance, how does the co-op accept proposals that they might fund? What is that process? What are the current proposals that are out there? How can you have visibility into those? And then when we think of implementing those in Rolang, I think that's an interesting proof of concept for mapping business processes on top of Rolang. And of course, if we're successful at that, it's a good proof that that's possible. And when we look at the platform co-op, we could imagine putting those processes to use in other co-ops, right? Sort of building that on that example. So those are just some of the possible uses of this model, and I thank you very much for your time. Thank you. There are a few minutes for questions if you have any. I do see Greg coming in too, so yeah.
Hi, thank you. How does this relate to bounty program?
Yeah, so it could relate to the bounty program in the sense that there's a fund to support work by either co-op members or just outside of the other like SOW process that we have. One thing about it is that these are projects, and if you look at most of the business planning processes that I've been involved in, well, that's the way it works. You've gone through a planning process and you've decided, hey, we want to invest in these things, right? And so you could put a budget per project, and that means that it's not, it's more focused on just those types of projects. Secondly, you could invest straight in people. You could say, well, this person, I don't really care what project they work on. I just really believe in them. And so I'm going to say to them, I would probably we would buy your contributions of however many hours at such a rate across these different projects. And so we would trust them to find where they best fit in those different projects, right? So I think it would be a way to use the resources of the co-op to fund building pieces of what Arching wants to build, for sure. Yeah. In the case here, so you have to think of each of these projects. I like to think of them as like a GitHub project. And so most of them, when they're small, they start out where there's one person that is going to be the one who looks at a contribution and says no or yes, right? And usually when we take like a pull request in a project, we're doing it from a technical perspective. Does this answer the need? Is this what I want? And so what we add on top of that is the terms. What did the person do? Are they describing their actions in a way that you'd like to verify, And secondly, what are the terms? How much money they want for it? And so we could create guidelines around that and say, well, for development and these types of things, these are the prices that we're paying, or it could be per person as well. But I don't see, there's no like automated process here. Like I say, I don't specify the governance. So I anticipate that it would be a human style governance, but people could create governance systems where there's voting to take these contributions, that type of stuff. But my initial thinking is you just have people that are in charge of that project and they make the decision. You've sort of deputized them to do that. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much.